Good evening and welcome to Artist Talk on Art on March 27th, 2023. I'm Doug Shear, president of ATOA. Founded in 1974, we are in our 49th year and the longest running panel series in the history of art. ATOA has held and recorded over 1,000 panels and dialogues featuring over 8,500 artists, curators, gallerists, historians, and museum staff. Our archive resides at the Smithsonian. Tonight, we have Professor Andrew Hottle moderating a panel on women artists active in the New York City art world in the 1970s and still making art today, which was titled aptly, "The Difference We've Made." This was based in part on a recent exhibition of the same name held this past fall at the Carter Burton Gallery in New York. The panel features three artists who are also curators: Cynthia Mailman, Vernita Nemec, and Susan Grabel, and an art writer, Ellen Lubell. This copyrighted Zoom program will be posted to the Artist Talk on Art YouTube channel within a week. You may address your questions or comments to Dr. Hottle by using the chat function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Andrew Hottle is professor of art at Rowan University in Glassboro, New Jersey. His research focuses on women in the visual arts, especially feminists of the 1970s. In addition to articles, essays, and book reviews, he has published two scholarly books, including The Art of the Sister Chapel, Exemplary Women, Visionary Creators and Feminist Collaboration, published in 2014. As a result of his research, the Sister Chapel, 1974 through 78, was reconstituted as a permanent installation at Rowan University in 2019. He is currently completing a comprehensive monograph on the feminist artist Sylvia Slay, 1916 through 2010, and preparing the catalog raisonné of her paintings. He is also writing an extensive monograph on the 19 founding artist members of Soho 20 Gallery, which was established in 1973, a historically important women-only cooperative exhibition venue in New York City. And now, Andrew Hottle.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me?
I can.
All right, great. As Doug mentioned, last fall, three of our panelists, Cynthia Mailman, Vernita Nemec, and Susan Grabel, co-curated an exhibition called The Difference We've Made, which was subtitled Women Artists Active in the New York City Art World in the 1970s and Still Making Art. The show featured works by 23 artists and was held at the Carter Burton Gallery. The illustrated catalog contains a statement by each artist, two essays, and an introduction. Our other panelist, Ellen Lubell, contributed one of those essays titled The Demand for Recognition. I also wrote an essay for the catalog entitled They've Been Here All Along. The catalog introduction was written by Marlena Vaccaro, who serves as Associate Executive Director of the Carter Burton Network and is also the Director and Curator of Carter Burton Gallery. First, I'd like to introduce each panelist and ask her to tell us a little about her work. Because I'm a feminist and firmly believe that we should hear and amplify women's voices, I will not read a list of their numerous accomplishments, which would take us half of this program. Instead, I will let them tell you about themselves. So we'll begin with Cynthia Mailman, an artist and feminist and founding member of Soho 20 Gallery.
Hi, nice to be here, and thank you all my friends far and near who are here today. It's hard to talk about the work. Do you want me to talk about this work or my work in general, Andrew?
All of it.
What fun. I don't want to take up the entire time. I learned about art very early. My parents were very into all of the creative endeavors. I took music lessons, I took dance, I took theater, and we went to the museum all the time. And I was able to know immediately who the artists were at a very early age. I was very lucky to have gone to a special art high school in Manhattan. The name of that school was High School of Art and Design. At that time, it was School of Industrial Arts. And I have to say, with all the other schools I've gone to, that was the most important place I ever went. For one thing, I realized that I wasn't alone. There really were other people who cared about other things, and art being one of them. And I learned craft there. I mean, we had to draw, we had to paint. It was a commercial art school, by the way. And after that, I went to Pratt Institute. It was always in my mind to be an artist. I always felt fame over fortune. And from early on, I realized that you had to have your own identification. That's how I knew a Cézanne from a Matisse and from a Velázquez. So when I got out of school, in my mind, I wanted to look at things differently. The most important thing to me about my art is the art itself. And the visual art to me is really the most important thing. So the subject, the idea, although very interesting to me, and I guess it's because of that I do certain work, is secondary to the art itself, which I feel should speak visually for itself. I've done 3 major groups of work so far. I'm 80 years old now, so I've had a little bit of time. In the beginning, when I joined Soho 20, I was, and I have been throughout my entire life, obsessed with ecology. It was called something different at that time. I was a bird watcher, a nature lover, and I was worried. And the work I did at that time was, I called it the correspondence between the natural world and the human-made one. And it really worried me. And so I did roads, and things became through views through my automobile, which was a Volkswagen. So the early works were paintings with mirrors, but in doing these paintings, I really tried to do it in a different manner because the paint was important to me. And so I didn't want to just mix colors. I never kind of liked that mushy look. And I tried to show space in a different way. And I think that my work for a long time has been about showing space and how you see that in a very different manner. So my colors were all flat. And I showed that by doing these unusually difficult, small gradations or changes in color. In about 1978, I was invited to be a part of the Sister Chapel, a wonderful project that happily Andrew has saved and has put up on permanent exhibition at Rowan University, which is just an incredibly great thing. And at that time, I started to do an exploratory book, a series of works that I believed would be in a book form. You know, artist books were very big. I did a lot of artist books at the time, and even before that. And I didn't really love the idea of the male god over all of us. And so I started actually looking into what the past was. Now, at that time, a lot of women were really doing work on the goddess. I really wasn't much into the goddess, but I think that I believed that women were more than what they are today. So this series that I began in 1978, directly related to the God painting, in which I did myself as God. I mean, I did God as a woman, which I think was actually very fitting. And these pieces that I'm showing and doing now are an investigation into the prehistoric imagery, really as evidence that the earliest and most potent deities were female. they are all these pieces are meant to be an artistic and visual and fact-based look into the origins of the concepts of God. It really is only the concept of God that is in our life. What other people believe or what was, it's the concept that we live by and our society lives by that affects us. So for most religions, man is a master by divine right. And that's a pretty heavy thing. So in this series, which I have named Origins of God, I thank you very much for that, Andrew, which I just called it the God book originally. And of course, it's no longer a book. It's this unending series. I have used in the earlier pieces, recognized authorities, scholars, and thinkers of the past, and they're done in watercolor, gouache, ink, gold paint, and some mixed media. Recently, I have found the need to speak more on what's going on now, our present times. I never imagined that a woman's sovereignty over her own body could be rewritten or canceled. It was a shock, but much as early female deities were replaced by other entities, mostly male, female agency is again under assault. Now, my newer work does address this, and instead of just using the very old writings, I am using Ruth Ginsburg. I'm trying to use words from people that might mean more to us today, and some of them have some very strong words about this. I hope that these works are still really good art, because that's my main objective in this. And I don't know what else to say, but I could talk for another hour and a half. But I think I should give somebody else a chance.
Thank you for that. Both your characterization of your work and yielding the floor to others too. We can all share the space. We'll move next to Vernita Nemec, aka Vernita Incognita, feminist, artist, performance artist, many, many things, and the originator of one of the very first feminist exhibitions.
Yes, X12. I always had a dream to come to New York. I came from Ohio, from a state college, where if I got a B on a drawing, the instructor would say, "Why are you so upset? You're just going to get married anyways." You know, so that was the decade that most of us came out of. When I came to New York, just a few years after I got here in 1965, I came on a fellowship to NYU for my graduate degree. And I came down to Soho to a museum, a project for living artists. And Art Workers Coalition, Carl Andre, Leon Golub, Nancy Spiro all became friends. And one day, another woman artist and I said, okay, the first 10 women who want to be in a show, raise your hand. And 11 women raised their hand. And unfortunately, we didn't take the 11th. And I'm sorry that we didn't. I don't even know if I want to tell you who it was. It was Agnes Denny's.
Oh.
So that was my first mistake. But the show is called X12, and it was, you know, kind of a protest against just using your initials when you signed your work and told who you were. And I became a part later of Soho 20 in 1975. And I think it's funny now when you say that 19 of you started it, but you called it Soho 20. But we won't go there right now.
No, there were
My
20.
work first began, I guess, when very, very self-involved. You know, it was like a woman I was trying to analyze the skills I had as a female and incorporate them into art. And so I began sewing. I thought, okay, if Claus Oldenburg can do it, so can I. And one of my first pieces was the box of 64 crayons, all made from satin and, you know, 15 inches high. And then I made some, you know, penis crayons and fruit crayons and goddess crayons. But I got all the 64 colors. So that was my first piece in that I ever showed in New York City, actually, in a little teeny gallery called Gallery 210 that was on Fifth Avenue. And then I became, later, I think I had a show of fabric landscapes at Razor Gallery, if any of you remember that. And then I became involved with Soho 20. And I started doing actually installations. My first installation was in 1978, and it was a piece called Humorette. And it had an awful lot to do with my father and not being able to communicate to him, you know, and his not being able to tell me how much he loved me and all that kind of stuff. And it wasn't until, well, I don't know, I'm not being so lucid as Cynthia was. I had a day installing a show at Viridian, where I've been the director for the past 22 years. You know, I've always told, I taught for 10 years at Brooklyn College, and I was always telling my students, be sure, those who said they were going to be famous artists, I said, get a day job, you know. So my head has always been involved partially in my art and partially in my day jobs, because I've been really fortunate throughout the years to have day jobs involved with the art community. You know, for 10 years, I was the director and programmer for Artist Talk on Art, and then for the past 22 years, the director of Viridian. My main concerns now have, because I could never throw anything away, I started making stuff from found objects and collaging from magazines that I couldn't get rid of. And then in 1994, I curated a show called Art from Detritus and got some wonderful funding from the Kauffman Foundation, did it in a number of cities in the United States, and have now done about 30 of those shows. And that's the show that now is currently on at Viridian. So the environment is, like, I think, one of our biggest worries right now in terms of the future of humans in the world, or humans anywhere. I don't know, performance, let's see. Yeah, performance. I guess that was ways of dealing with forsaken love affairs and secrets that I didn't want to admit in real life. I thought if I put them into performance, then it becomes art. And I began being involved with Buto, which is a Japanese movement form that I thought I could do until I was 90. So far things are good. I can still do it. And I don't have anything scheduled yet, but I will let you know. What else? What else can I say, Andrew? I don't know.
You can say what you wish. So.
Oh dear, what I wish. My goodness, I wish. No, I can't reveal that. No, that's all for now.
Okay, well, thank you. Next, we have Susan Grabel, another feminist, figurative and multimedia artist, curator, and president of Series Gallery, a feminist gallery. So we'll hear next from Susan.
Thank you, Andrew. I came to art actually when I was in college. I took the end of my sophomore year, I took a summer session at the University of Wisconsin because I was going to decide whether I was going to be an English lit major or a math major. And after 2 days of analytic geometry and calculus, I decided to be an English lit major and was looking for something else to take to fill the space. And I noticed that you didn't need any prerequisites for art, whereas in Brooklyn College, where I was going, you needed a lot of prerequisites. So I took an art course and I was smitten. I fell in love with it. And when I came back to New York, I decided I continued at Brooklyn College as an English lit major, but I went to the Brooklyn Museum Art School and I got most of my basic training there. My work, has evolved over the years. And what I've been doing is mostly, I work on the human dimension of social and political issues. So in the late 1970s, I was doing work on consumerism. I tend to work in series, and the work is content driven, but it evolves, one series evolves from the other. It evolves in terms of content and in terms of mediums. So in the late 70s, I was doing work on consumerism, Caught in the American Dream series in clay, reacting to the buy culture of our society. And then in the 80s, as I saw an increase in homeless people on the streets, I began to do work on homelessness. I did environments in clay and wood showing the humanity of homeless people. In the 90s, as I became aware of people's reaction to the homeless, I started to do clay reliefs, portrait reliefs in clay and wood, showing how the sanctuaries we create for ourselves become our prisons. In the early 2000s, as I became increasingly aware of the changes in my own body, I did work on aging women's bodies using cast paper sculptures and collagraph prints, showing the beauty of the aging woman, as well as normalizing the forms. And then starting in around 2014, as I saw an increase in divisiveness in our society, I started to work on a series called Confluence, which is one of the pieces that was in the show. And some of the work it's digital fabrications and digital cutouts in wood and steel, and sometimes I'm using cast paper with that, showing that the only way forward is to move together, which in 2014 sounded like a real possibility, and now these days, in our hyper-partisan culture, it's sounding a little naive, but I still have to believe that it's possible.
Thank you. That was direct and to the point. Our fourth panelist is Ellen Lubell, who is today working in public relations, and in the 1970s was a prominent and important art critic, writing for a number of arts magazines, including Arts Magazine, Art in America, and others. So welcome, Ellen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for including me on this panel. I actually had a beginning similar to Susan's. I ditched a bio pre-med major in college and started studying art with, and it ended up being primarily with the art critic Lawrence Alloway. And I began writing about art in 1972. And at that point, as I saw more and more art, I became aware of and alert to and involved with the women artists movement, and founded Women Art Magazine in 1976, a magazine devoted exclusively to art by women. And we published 7 issues before running out of money in 1978. And I hope that it had some influence and impact on the art world. The point was to provide the maximum exposure of the work of both current and historic women artists possible. So we ran features, many reviews and news articles in each issue. And we're sold on quite a number of newsstands and bookstores. So I think it was seen widely, and I'm happy to say that it now exists as a website. The full archives of the website are available at womenartmag.org. And as Andrew mentioned, I've also had this side gig called a career in communications, and that's mostly been public relations for nonprofits since the 80s. And here I am.
Thank you. And I can attest that woman art is a gold mine for anybody who's doing research on that period.
Wonderful.
So.
And also, I just want to add, Ellen was so supportive to us. It was like unbelievable. I wish we had the same kind of support today, actually.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. Thank you.
Absolutely. It was unbelievable.
I wish I could provide it.
Great time for art.
Indeed. All right, so this first question is for Cynthia, Vernita, and Susan. Could you tell us about the origins of the exhibition from last fall and how it materialized, and in particular, why now, and what did you want to accomplish?
I think I have to answer that.
You have to begin.
Sorry, I have to begin. When the pandemic started, I call it the plague, and we were all in, and people started dying. And I think the first woman artist that I heard about dying was Helene Elan. Joyce Kozloff was just incredible about knowing everyone and keeping everybody informed as to what was going on. And over this period of about a year, could have been more than a year, it seemed to me that more and more women were dying, or more and more people were dying. But I saw this group that I knew and that I was out there with just disappearing. Now, everybody didn't die from COVID, but it was also our age. Oh, somewhere towards the end of whatever time period that was, certainly a year and a half, the last person that I recall getting really upset about was Mary Beth Edelson. And I just got really upset and I said, gee, we're losing this entire generation of artists and I have to do something about it. Now I called my friend Nancy Azara. I know Nancy for a very long time, and I also was in Soho 20 with her partner and Darla Bjorg. And so we've just been friends for all this time. And I just thought of her and I told her how I felt. And she said, well, you know, Cynthia, life is that way. The Impressionists died. I said, yeah, Nancy, but they're all in museums. Are we going to be completely forgotten? And she said, what do you want to do? I said, I'd like to do something. And Nancy said, great. We started talking over a period of weeks about renting a space and all that entailed, and insurance. And at that time, Nancy was going to have a solo show at Carter Burden Gallery. And she said, you know, Cynthia, I'm really kind of over the top here. So how about if I introduce you to Marlena of Carter Burden, but I'm going to kind of have to drop out for a while now. And I said, wow, that would be really great. And really, it's only because of the generosity of Nancy Azara. And I want to say all artists are not that generous, that we were able to have this show. And I spoke to Marlena and she just loved the idea. And she spoke to her board and they said, go for it. And I thought, yeah, well, I don't want to do this alone. No. And so I thought, well, who would I like to work with? And I thought, well, I'd like to work with Vernita and Susan. And I know both of these people for a very, very long time. I like them. I respect them. I like their art. I respect their art. And I know we could all work together. And so I asked them if they would do this with me. And happily, they said yes. And so there we are with the Carter Burden Gallery, which Marlena Vaccaro was just unbelievable. I mean, it's a space, it's in Manhattan, yes. They sit for it, they do publicity for it, they hang the show for it. And we all three of us got together with Marlena and talked about details. So I think that everybody else can jump in now.
Well, one thing I wanted to add is that I think Cynthia made a very wise choice in choosing Susan and I, because we all have very, very different tastes in art. And I think that helps spread, you know, the sense about what women artists do, what we make. It wasn't just about feminism. It was about women making art and still making art and being really serious about their work. And so I think that was an important part of our working together. And we know very different people. We often argued about who was going to be in, and there were so many people that we couldn't include that we wanted to. And I don't even want to mention their names because we're going to somehow, you know, somebody is going to do another show. If not us, someone else will do it. And these gaps will be filled, I think, over the time period.
Don't you think, Vernita, we always thought of this as a beginning
Yes.
we always
exactly.
felt that there should be another bigger, because you're absolutely right. We left out as double the amount of people that we were able to put in. And we
Right.
talked about it several times that we would do something else, and I'm still up for it.
I wanted
I
to-
mean, our hope was also that this would be the spark that would get a lot of other exhibits going. So
Exactly.
that, we could only fit really comfortably 23 artists in the space. We talked to Marlena about it. She felt that was the optimum amount. So, and our purpose was also to celebrate women artists while they're still alive. And also, since there's been a big resurgence in interest in feminist, explicitly feminist imagery, work that deals with identity and sexuality, body image. And we wanted to show the breadth of work that women are doing. They're not just doing that, explicitly feminist work. They're doing many different kinds of work. And that was one of the big things that we wanted to also highlight. And the big thing is, as Cynthia said, I just turned 80 this year. Cynthia did too. I think Vernita's not far behind.
Vernita's my age, aren't we the same? We're a month
Okay.
apart.
All right, so Vernita's already 80. So, we were, feeling that and just seeing, women who were dying, who worked all their lives, were committed artists and whose work didn't get the attention that it deserved. So we wanted to start to rectify that.
We did also manage to get a few more women's names and, remembrances, because I said, let's do a night of performance, since that's an aspect of my work. And I did a piece where I used my sculpture as a prop, but then Linda Montano did a beautiful piece. She asked me the names of women artists of that time who had died, and I gave her a list.
Mm.
And she did a morning, MOURNING performance for these women, and which was an incredibly wonderful acknowledgement, I think. And, in a way of remembering them. That
It
happened.
was, and there were several things we were not able really to put into this show. I mean, and definitely performance was always on our mind that we would do that. We also weren't able to put in large installations. We
Right.
just didn't have the space for it. And it doesn't mean to say that all of these other areas and other outlooks were not very much a part of the feminist movement, very much a part of the art world at that time. They most certainly were. And
Yes, Women in the Arts was very instrumental, and we don't often get credit for it. And we had a 50th anniversary exhibit at the Series Gallery called 71 to 21. And it had 46 artists, some of our art luminaries, Alice Neal, Louise Bourgeois, Joan Mitchell. We're all founding members of Women in the Arts Foundation, and we're still a vital group. And if you want to look us up, we're at www.wiaf.org. And it's still a very vital group, and we have wonderful talks from mostly women artists.
Great, thanks for that. Vernita, you mentioned space limitations, and Cynthia, you mentioned not being able to put in installations. Could you tell us a little more about the selection process? What were you looking for? How did you decide ultimately which artists to include? Not that we want you to tell us who you couldn't include,
Right.
but
Well,
what prompted those decisions?
Well, one thing that we were very concerned about was the courageous women who started women's galleries at that time. So we wanted to be sure to have women from the women's galleries included in one way or another. Not necessarily the founders, but at least some of those people. And it was also, I don't know, a balance of materials and different kinds of expressions. But they all had to be women who had worked in New York then and were still working in New York now.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, we wanted the widest range of art styles and materials and points. So What's going on? I don't.
Something's
The
happening.
sharing screen.
Oh,
Oops.
we're back. I'm so glad that we're back. We really did work very hard on the selection process, and it was very, very difficult.
Yeah.
And we really couldn't show everything, and we couldn't show every kind of style. And that's how, and I think it's tough on us. I'm really glad we shared the burden of this, guys, I mean, women, because we each left out, we all left out very close friends, people whose art we really respect, and women that should have been in this show. And we just couldn't do it.
Wasn't room, yeah. There
Well,
was.
this was just a teaser, really, of, just showing the possibilities and the beginning. It was never meant as a total survey of, of what women were doing and what they're, continuing to do. But we all came with our lists, and we went through them, and we did a lot of research also on other women that we didn't know, who were active in the 1970s, and try to get all kinds of diverse perspectives and mediums and everything. So,
And I was doing a little bit of research, and in 2007, Art in America, their June-July issue is all about feminist art. But one of the things they mentioned was like the wax show, and that had over 100 women artists. That's the number that you almost need to begin the story. And then there was another exhibit that was not Women's Caucus for Art, but it was a group like that. In 1978 did a show, and it too had about 100 women. So
Well, Women in the Arts led the way with Women Choose Women. That was a landmark exhibit at the New York Cultural Center, which was a museum at that time. And that was the first really egalitarian view of women, survey of women's art. And it
thank
was,
you, Elaine. That's
Yeah.
good that you reminded us of that.
Yes, thank you for that. We actually have a couple of questions coming up in the chat, which are quite relevant to the next thing I was going to ask.
Want here.
What's happening?
It's driving me crazy, guys. It's not just, women and Andrew, there we are.
Yes.
It's not just me.
Yes, whoever is trying to share a screen, make sure you're not hitting those buttons. So the question was about, is it better for women now? Has access improved? These are coming up in the chat, coming from Ellen Hickerson. And actually, Ellen, I was coming to you next about your catalog essay, which refers to the 23 artists in the show as the tip of an iceberg that hasn't melted and isn't floating away. An apt metaphor, which I liked very much. It suggests that most women artists are still underwater, that is unseen. So between the women's art movement of the 1970s and the current situation for women artists, what has changed? What have we done right, and what are we still doing wrong?
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Things have changed immensely. I mean, just in the last, I'm trying to remember back before the pandemic, just in the past, let's say 4 years, two of the most talked about artworks in New York City were by women. Carol Walker's The Incredible Sugar Baby in Williamsburg at the Domino Sugar Factory, and Deborah Cass's Oi Yo sculpture that's sited outside the Brooklyn Museum. So, I mean, in that sense alone, women have really made a certain amount of stride. As I cited, I mean, going back to the iceberg metaphor, we all know that for every artist who has a gallery show, who's in a museum, there are hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of artists who are struggling unheralded. Okay, they can't get a gallery, or that maybe they'll have a very local gallery show and with no media coverage that helps propel them onward. And that, I think, is true beyond just the gender specific. That is true for every artist right now. And I think we have come a long way. I mean, the statistics I cited in my essay show that women have not achieved parity in terms of exhibition, but have gone from, let's say, 0 to 45 at least. And they are really lagging in museum shows and being acquired in museum collections and at coming up to auction and having serious auction prices. That is really a place where things have to change. But I think there's a lot of exciting art by women being made now. And since the 70s, 80s, and 90s, I mean, and there are women who are acknowledged as among the greatest women artists. I'm thinking of Alice Neal, is certainly one of the greatest painters, American painters of the 20th century. So there's work to do. I'm not quite sure how that work is going to be done. Some of it is certainly about the receptivity and openness of gallerists and museum curators. I think museum curators who are feminist or have been exposed to women artists are a place to start. And certainly allies like Andrew will take us very far.
We'll see how far I get.
Well, thank goodness you're there, Andrew. And you know, Ellen just mentioned Alice Neal. Yeah, Alice Neal. She sort of represents all of us, and that's what's wrong. And what Ellen just said about us not being in museum collections, that's where it's at. And that's why I wanted to do this show. Where was the Whitney and where was the Museum of Modern Art? Where were these people? And why didn't they come? I mean, this was a very, very good group of important women. I also want to say that not everybody wants to be a big seller. You know, I was in a commercial gallery, a very important one, and really, I did not like it. I don't want anybody to tell me what I have to do about my work. And if something sells, I don't want to have to go back like I'm a robot, which we know about these days, and do 40 of them. I want to express myself and continue to grow as an artist. And I don't have that much work. As you know, Andrew, and many of you, I've had a lot of really terrible disasters that I've somehow survived and I'm still working. But it's not important to me to be in everybody's home. It is important to be in the museums. And it is what I thought about when I thought about this show. That yes, it's true, the Impressionists did their work and they died, but they're all in museums, but we're not. And I'm kind of tired of Alice Neal. Yeah, she's everywhere, but you know, where's the rest of us? That's how I feel about it. And this show should have been picked up by the Whitney. And of course, the Whitney has jumped on the wagon as everybody else, the bandwagon, and they're all pulling out whatever work they have from women artists. And by the way, there's some terrific work that a lot of the museums have. But many people really have been forgotten. And certainly at least half of the women in this show are really forgotten. I mean, and let's even just talk about Sylvia, who you're doing a book on, Sylvia Slee. She is not known. And by the way, in terms of feminist art, she really did that kind of, she did male nudes when kind of nobody did. And she didn't change her work to be feminist. And what is known as feminist art should not be the only art that is known to be women's, because I certainly did not fit into that, and I resented it. You know, I resented that I wasn't considered important because I was doing something that did not specifically deal with whatever that was at that time or today.
Well, I'm
Anyway,
unfortunately, the powers that be sort of, you know, okay, so they're going to do something about women artists, so then they seize on a particular thing and they make that the only thing, where they seize on, you know, that Alice Neal gets a lot of play, which is great, and Louise Bourgeois and a few people, and they say, okay, we're done. This is, you know, we did women already. So, I mean, I think
so
that's
true.
what happens a lot.
Well, and in all fairness, Louise Bourgeois was well recognized quite a while
Definitely.
ago.
Yes.
Ellen, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just want to say that when we had Alice Neal on the cover of our magazine in 1978,
That was different.
because she was in a film about women artists, we had to go to her apartment in East Harlem, and she had at least hundreds of paintings, and you had to walk on this path between the paintings, and it was a while before she had been working for decades before
Yeah.
she got recognized. And
Sure.
that is true of artists, whether they're women or men, or of any kind. I mean, really, laboring in obscurity is what happens to a lot of artists. Some artists are bright stars at 25, and some artists labor in obscurity for quite a number of years. And if the right curator sees your work when you're in your 70s, then all of a sudden you're one of the bright stars. But some of it is just the good fortune of having connections or coming to the attention of a curator. And of course, it's hard to plan that with any intention. But just saying, Alice Neal wasn't someone who, was a bright star initially. I mean, she really did not become well known until one of her final decades.
I wanted to talk a little bit too about Nancy Spiro, who also, she and Leon worked, they were in their 60s before anything began to happen for them in a meaningful way. And yet Nancy would always say, I get it, anytime I'm invited to a show, I accept. And she would be in our little political shows. I would do a little postcard show and she'd put a piece in it.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. And she was so generous, I think that is, I don't know, it's another clue to what we have to hold on to, I think, in our own frustrations of not being recognized, is we still have to keep making the art, keep sharing our information, and giving it out there, because it could still happen. It could still happen.
Yes, well, when I put together the show for Women in the Arts, I was very taken aback in a way that I was greeted by foundations and galleries very enthusiastically that I was putting together a women's show, a major women's show. And it was really terrific. It was, I said, things have changed, that we had donations of art from galleries, foundations, and artists themselves from the past. And there was a sense of camaraderie and recognizing women's art. So changed.
I think, Ellen, you really were a major pioneer. And at that time, we had people, well, first of all, the arts were different. There were galleries, there were magazines, there were newspapers. I mean, there were all kinds of people writing about art. And we had a little group that we always went to everything together. And you were a very important person there. Peter Frank was an important person. Leon Golub was an important person. Lawrence Alloway was a very, very important person.
Lots of artists meeting cultural, in political groups, PAD, political art, activation, distribution, and Art Workers Coalition. A lot of those, and what was it? Women Artists in Revolution.
Of course.
We don't have that anymore.
The
Well,
Heritage
very, very potent time. And that was so many art organizations really had activists. Women in the Arts did the statistics on how many women artists were represented in major galleries. And we handed them out in front of the major galleries and got feedback on that. I think Ellen Lubell, weren't you a member of Women in the Arts, if I recall?
Was I?
We had the gallery upstairs.
Yeah, I don't think I was a member. I'm not an artist, but I certainly know women in the arts and you know, sort of paid attention to it, but I'm not sure if I was member. I don't remember anymore, honestly.
Well, we really
I
did that.
was a member of Women in the Arts
Yes.
early on and did have some, and did have no, I was president of Women's Caucus for Art.
Well, we're forgetting a lot of groups here that were very, very important.
Right.
at the
And Women's
time,
Caucus also did a lot of collecting of statistics and picketing in front of the Met and picketing in front of MoMA. Yeah, I
we
did
all
remember that.
We organized
Yeah.
the Museum of Modern Art in 72. I was to celebrate our first anniversary. We were founded in 71. And Louise Bourgeois was picketing, and Pat Pasloff, and a lot of, also I think Joan Mitchell had just come in from Paris.
We did a lot of demonstrations at all the museums, at the Guggenheim,
Right,
at MoMA, at the Whitney. People
that's right.
did all kinds of wonderful gestures and performance pieces.
You know, during this
I-
show, we thought of that. We actually, the three of us thought about, you know, we should pick at the New York Times. We should do something. We should get people out because we're not being covered.
Right.
And
Yeah.
just in general, that those statistics have not really changed that much. And we really wanted to do this. And I just think it was too much work for us at that time. And we finally said, oh, I don't know if we can do this. And you don't want to be too self-serving and say, well, we're picking you because you didn't come to our show.
Right.
You know, so I don't know. But it certainly is something that you recall that, Susan, you and Vernita and I spoke about that. I mean, quite a few times, and maybe we should have done it. That might have been a good thing.
Next time.
Yeah, but you know, we really should, this should be a larger venue. It really should. I mean, it's just incredible that Marlena and her board,
Right.
which is unbelievable, you know, did this for us, but it should be picked up. It really should go further. There are so many women with wonderful work who are working all this time and before we all die. We should do more of this. We do, as Susan said, we need more people to pick it up and do it. You know, I think anyway that
And it should be done at a place that its second name is museum.
yes, absolutely. Very important.
Yeah,
I think one issue is that the amount of coverage of the arts has shrunken. There is
Yes.
much less, there are fewer magazines, there is much less coverage of the art,
Right.
visual arts anyway, in newspapers. And I remember there was a demonstration outside the Museum of Modern Art. Cynthia, you were one of the picketers.
I certainly
And,
was.
I wrote about it in the Village Voice.
Yes,
I
you
wrote about what was coming. And I remember, I don't remember his name, a newscaster from CBS came to the picket, came to the protest. And he was looking for David Verdun, who also had a day job working for a major magazine. So he wasn't there. I said, well, he had my article in his hand, yet he's looking for David Verdun. And I said, well, I wrote that.
Right.
And he said, oh, oh, you wrote. And I told, you know, I told him all about what was happening and had my 50 seconds of fame. But these,
I think it's 15 minutes.
well, it wasn't the 15
Supposed to
minutes.
be.
But that doesn't happen much anymore.
No.
Well, you know,
And it
There's
was
press. No local.
I was just gonna say that the
Yeah.
death of the Village Voice, I think also, it did a lot of art coverage and it helped, you know, they were not always into the big famous artists, you know, they would
No,
mention
no.
us.
And the Soho Weekly News we had,
Soho News, I was gonna say that, thank you.
which was
Soho News,
absolutely wonderful.
did a
We had
lot of arts coverage.
we had we had Corinne Robbins who was writing. We had-
Yes, me.
I mentioned you, you were, well, Ellen, you know, and by the way, Peter Frank, I mean, Ellen, you and
Yes.
Peter Frank and I, we hung around together all the time. And he
John
wrote
Perrault.
about so many of the women in art, it was Art News, wasn't it? And we just had this exposure that, as Ellen said, it's not just women. It doesn't exist for anybody. And really, it's only the few names and the few very large galleries and all of these cooperative galleries that have so many wonderful people still working in them, still doing the work. I just ignored. And of course, a lot of that has fallen by the wayside. It's very, very hard to maintain today, to
Yeah.
run it, to pay the
Thank
rent,
you.
to do that kind of work. And keep that money and keep that thing supported. And it doesn't seem right. Then, as Ellen said, we don't even have patrons. You know, when we were at Soho 20, I really didn't have any money and I had to pay dues. And every show I would make sure I did one piece that would sell, that was pretty-ish. And it was great, really. It was a lot better than some gallery director saying, this sold, do 12 more. Just really never wanted to do that. And it's just a different era, isn't it, entirely? I miss those times. Of course,
Diane Churchill just remembered Lucy Lepard. A lot of people who no longer are in New York, and they went on to their day jobs, I suppose. Because we all have to survive.
More.
all important people, very, very important people who have to be remembered, and we have to thank them all. I just remembered another man who was very important, Donald Cuspit. He also was very important, and we don't have these people. I don't think we have these people. Are they out there and we don't know them? Ellen, are they out there and we don't know them?
Well, Donald Cuspid is. Donald Cuspid writes.
Yeah. Where does he write, Ellen?
Oh, I can't think of.
I
think-
mean, such a lovely person, really, and he wrote, about the arts. But a lot of the people that did are gone.
I
Yeah.
think what
I think also, I mean, now the writing is online. It's
Yes.
like, the online, magazines Hyperallergic and,
Yes.
they're like
Brooklyn Rail.
that. Yeah. So I think that's where the writing is now.
But the
But
problem is-
you still have the same problem in terms
Yeah.
of getting
There's
the.
no money in it.
I
There-
think
Art
also-
criticism was always a poorly paid profession, but now it's
It's
just, it doesn't, their payment doesn't exist anymore. I mean, yes, for a few probably writers and editors, but the money has really coalesced, like the 1% has really coalesced with the very big galleries like Swerner, Gagosian, and Hauser and Wirth. And you have a middle tier, and then everyone's just.
I'm wondering, all these people that we're talking about were our age. And so I'm wondering what the young are up to in terms of women's art. Like, do they still feel that neglect that we felt? Or have they figured out a way to go beyond that? Or have times changed so much that it just doesn't matter to them?
I think
Andrew could
more
answer that, because
and
he's a professor and he sees all these young people. How
And
does it
tell us.
feel?
Andrew,
Well, I'm not in New York, so I don't
No, but where
necessarily
you
see
are,
it.
you're at the second largest university in New Jersey. I mean, it's a
True.
huge, important university.
I can only say anecdotally that my sense is that younger women don't feel as excluded. But that doesn't mean that the opportunities really exist.
Right. Well,
So how they feel and what the reality is going to be different.
exactly.
right,
The museums still don't collect as much women's art as they do male art. And secondly, the value of women's art is like 10 cents on a dollar compared to male art, unfortunately.
Well, and this actually kind of brings me around to another question I wanted to ask the panelists, and that is, today's emerging women artists arguably have more and better opportunities than you did, in part because of everything you contributed. But in terms of older women, and I use that term sort of generally, where do older women and how do older women and where do older women fit into an art scene that tends to celebrate the latest thing? So what do women who have been around for a long time, who've been making art, who are contributing in that way, what can they do? Any thoughts about that?
Well, yeah, they-
Besides being in your show.
Answer on that
Yeah.
one.
Well, I mean, one thing that they can do is do what we did, is curate your own exhibitions. I mean, that's what women do. We go out and do our own thing. If it's not happening, we did this exhibition. I just came off of curating a big exhibition at Snug Harbor Cultural Center. There were 46 women artists in it. Don't shut up about the way women's voices have not been valued and the need to raise and value women's voices. And there was like 4 large rooms, so we did that. And we did the show with Carter Burden. And also women, joined co-op galleries. There were a lot of, the 3 main feminist galleries in the city, AAR, Soho 20, and Ceres, but there are others across the country.
Soho 20 doesn't exist anymore. It's
okay.
not a gallery space,
Right.
unfortunately.
And there are lots of other co-ops across the country, and there are other co-ops in New York. And women's organizations, as Helene was saying, Women in the Arts, but also Women's Caucus for Art, which is a national organization. They have conferences every year in different cities. And I was president of the New York chapter in the 90s. And they provide opportunities for exhibitions, for sharing ideas, for sharing, intellectual ideas and technical information, and for getting the opportunities for leadership. So, we have to go out and do it ourselves.
I have a great loss with Soho 20 because I have this work I really want to show. And I mean, I have to thank Andrew because I'm getting a show in the university, and Vernita has known about the universities and has gotten out there and gotten her work out there as well. And we do have to tap into other places and try to keep our work out there, because you do want people to see your work, and you do. If you show your work, you're much more apt to do more work. So, I mean, I think Andrew is one of the people who's really been showing. You've shown a lot of women artists, haven't you, Andrew?
We have.
And
At
also,
our
you have a big
university.
collection now of women's art.
We
Yeah.
do. And I do want to mention, by the way, Susan, you mentioned Caught in the American Dream series, and our university gallery owns one of those. And it will be on view next month in a collection exhibition. So there you go. I did want to say also that, just following what Cynthia said, that university galleries are in many ways easier places to show because they don't have the same kinds of boards and oversight that museums have. And so the timing is sometimes, better. You can have a narrower window in order to do things. We don't plan exhibitions out 5 or 10 years. It's maybe a couple of years, but not that long. And so,
And you don't care if you sell the work.
Exactly.
It doesn't. The price isn't important, and
Right.
that's what
And
makes it so great.
And it's exposure to a younger audience. So
Yes.
it draws attention to this work. And I do think universities are, in some cases, an untapped resource. So I'm sort of answering my own question, but
You should.
but I think they're important venues.
I think another thing too is a lot of us now have opportunities to create exhibitions, and we have to, like at Viridian, I really always try to have at least 50% of the people in my juried shows, or even in the artists who belong to the gallery, that half of them are women, at least.
Good point. If we had more of that.
Yeah.
And I think too, opportunity is something that you got to share it. You've got to share it. You hear about a good opportunity and you don't want to say, oh, well, if I share it, maybe I won't get in. I think that's the wrong way to think about it. I think the sharing really helps, and it gets more of us out there.
Well, we do that a lot in the co-op galleries. I mean, in series, we do a lot of sharing. We provide a lot of opportunity for exposure for women,
Right.
not just for members. We have a lot of different ways of people being involved with series and showing whether they're members or not.
Exactly.
I
Pretty,
think university galleries are also a conduit to exposure because, Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, I think a lot of universities are naturally covered by the local or state media that are near them. So university galleries can often be covered in newspapers and magazines that are seen, at least.
Less so now than in the past because a lot of those smaller newspapers are disappearing as well.
Right.
So where we are in South Jersey, really we don't have very many local news outlets anymore.
Too bad.
So they cover the whole state.
Yeah.
So we are, sort of competing with everybody else for that bit of attention.
That's a shame.
it's very sad, very sad. I mean, Staten Island has one of the few local papers, and we no longer have anybody covering the arts.
We used to
they-
have great coverage. Yeah, Michael
We used to have
Frizzola
that. Michael
was
Frizzola
was the art editor, and he covered everything. He was great, whether we were on Staten Island or if we were showing anyplace else. And
right.
since he retired, they decided not to include that anymore.
Yeah, we had Rob Bailey Mulatto for a while, but he went on to the Post, and it is very sad, and we don't know what's going on even on in our borough.
Mhm.
And I know that Brooklyn has quite a large paper, but they didn't cover our show. I mean, they did list us very nicely, and all of these online publications that you mentioned, Susan, they didn't cover us either.
I know. Well, the Brooklyn Rail also didn't cover us. And
I just said that, the Brooklyn paper, the Brooklyn Rail didn't cover us. And the Staten Island show, which you did, which was incredible. It was just a fantastic show, Susan. And it was a large show with beautiful work. And without the Staten Island paper, we didn't, I don't think we got anything.
Well, we did get the magazine, that Gallery and Studio and
That
Gallery
was in
magazine.
this show, not at your show.
Right,
Right.
right. No,
No.
and what I did actually, even at the show at Snug Harbor, so one of the events, I had people write postcards to the New York Times, telling them to come out, to Holland Cotter and to Roberta Smith, about this show and come out and see the show. Come to Staten Island and see this great show, and people wrote their own thing on it. We sent about 40 or 50 postcards.
I think this is another thing too, that, when we were younger and doing these things, we realized we had to do a lot of it for ourselves.
Yes.
And I think we forget that as we progress in our careers. And I remember having a show I can't remember even the name of the city, but it was somewhere up in Buffalo. And I went up there for the reception, and also I was going to do a performance and talk to the students and do that whole thing. But I went into town one day and I found out where the newspaper office was, and I said, could I speak to your art editor? And got 2 articles out of that. So,
They had an art editor.
what?
They had an art
And
editor.
they had an art editor.
Which is
Exactly.
something that seems to be missing in so many places now.
So
Sometimes you're better off in a small town somewhere. Maybe you're covered because it isn't everywhere. I think
Well,
Brooklyn,
it used to be like that on Staten Island with Michael. I mean, he gave us great coverage with everything. So,
well, the paper did pictures.
Yeah.
And I got a write-up in the New York Times twice on Staten Island, once at the Staten Island Museum, and once at Snug Harbor. And they wrote up Sylvia's show, if you recall, Andrew, which really put Sylvia on the map. And that was a show on Staten Island, amazingly. She really was not well-known before then. So with the demise of local newspapers, and as Ellen said, in general, and there's no money in it, and everybody has to pay the rent or the mortgage. Oh, it is a problem.
Well, I think maybe we have to make trouble again.
I was thinking that maybe we really do.
Let's
Maybe we
figure out
do.
something for the old ladies,
We have a question from Diane Churchill, who's asking us, do you think some of the print communication has been replaced by Instagram?
Well,
Silence.
No,
Instagram is fine if you want to see your giant work of art reduced to, a postage stamp and sort of lose everything that the art is about. But the one of the points of art magazines especially was not just your photo and your name, but a reasoned
Right.
description and a reasoned
Essay.
discussion of that work, and you're not finding that on Instagram.
Right.
I'm
Well,
not on Instagram. I mean,
Right.
I have an account, but I've never used it. And I do think there's a difference between having, I mean, Soho 20 has now become an online gallery. I mean, that is not the same to me. I want you to actually see my work. Even though a lot of people go to the museum and all they do is stand there with their camera. There is a difference between seeing something live and seeing it reproduced. And I
most-
think many people have forgotten that in a general way.
well, that's,
most
Yeah.
art is better. Most art is better in person. I mean, when I was doing art history at one time, and when you're showing, even like you're showing a slide when we're showing slides, and so like a Japanese teacup is the same size as a Jackson Pollock painting. Online, you don't get a feel for it when you don't have the dimensions. But I mean, Instagram is great. It's a lot of fun. You can see, you can put up, you put up your work and show it to people, and you get to see a lot of really interesting work. But it doesn't replace, getting any kind of critical discussion of your work or any kind of intellectual discussion about your work. It doesn't replace that.
No, I mean, Susan, your pieces, I can't imagine your stand-up pieces that I saw at Series on Instagram. I mean, you're not getting that emotional punch from it.
Mhm.
And I don't think that people would see, and my pieces now are small. And I do want to say that that Marlena hung that show so beautifully at Carter Burton, and people really did have the time and the space, and they walked around and they really looked at the work. They stood in front of my work and read it and looked at it. People on Facebook and Instagram and online, and we were all, and you
Flip it
don't
through.
really get
Mhm.
that emotional, visceral. I don't think it's the same as listening to music live as compared to any other way. Really, no. Oh, Diane. Diane is making another comment. I don't know why we don't have more people commenting. I hope we have more people watching. And
Ask questions, guys. Ask us questions.
Yes, please feel free to ask questions.
I have
yeah,
one comment. One of my favorite things that Donna Marxer used to say when she would introduce herself in the beginning of a panel, she
Yeah.
took over as executive director when Vernita stepped down. So that's to put it in context. And she did that for, I think, about 4 years altogether. Anyway, she used to sardonically say, I'm a submerging artist. Okay. In some of the research that I've done pretty recently about the scale of the art, I hate to say the word market, but let's say of the art world, there are reportedly about 1.4 million professional working artists worldwide, around the world. How many of those are in the United States? Probably about a third, I would estimate, although I haven't seen that specifically. So those of us, and I'm of the same age that you are, those of us that have been around in the art world, and my parents were artists, so I've never known a world that wasn't somehow, overlapping with the art world. It was a much more intimate place. And there were more people, the ratio of people writing about art, exhibiting art, and the number of people who claimed to be an artist was much tighter. It was much more integral. And starting around the time that all of us came to our professional maturity, let's say, started making art, or holding panels about art or whatever it was, when the art world really blossomed in the 1970s. I
Yes.
think at that stage, it set off something that has taken off, dramatically, exponentially. So we've just gotten to a stage where it was like Moore's Law. I noticed that Moore of Moore's Law just passed yesterday, who said, that things keep doubling in speed. I'm gonna brutalize what he said, but they keep doubling in speed and getting half as expensive. And basically what's happened in the art world that I've seen is it's just gotten enormous. So, and at the same time, in many ways, it's been abandoned by those who used to write about it and used to promote it and used to do reviews. So that's one of the things that's really missing is nobody does reviews of art anymore. Anyway.
Why have they abandoned it? Is it because of what Ellen said, that there's no money in it? Or is it
Yeah,
that there's
I
no
think it has.
outlet, or nobody wants to read it? What do we think the reason for
Well,
that?
as Andrew or a couple of people tonight have said, one of the problems is that the local publication, whether it's magazine, art paper, newspaper, whatever, are dying breeds. They're going away. They've been usurped and taken over by online everything. And that's much more amorphous. It's hard to wrap your arms around. How do you communicate to the online community is not so simple. If you're not gonna meet them physically someplace, how do you make the connection? So it's rather amorphous.
I'd like to jump in here for a second. First of all, I want to thank everybody. It was just wonderful to hear all of you speak. As an artist who spent 26 years in New York and now living in Florida, and active on Instagram and Facebook, and essentially using it as a platform to promote and to make connections and have dialogues with people, because it does happen on those sites if you use them the way that they're intended. And the point I'm trying to make is right now we are sitting here on Zoom, and I can have the luxury of listening in to you people have this discussion about these important women at different times in history. And I can be on Instagram and talk with people back and forth, and they can see what I'm doing. Now, obviously, it's not the same as looking at it in person, but the point is that you connect with people even within your community. You then get people to come to your shows. You then get people to come to this Zoom meeting. You use it's a tool. It's not about, writing critiques on there. It has nothing to do with articles. It has to do with using it as a tool to make connections. And I will tell you, it works.
Thank you. Maybe you'll encourage us.
Get on there and see what it's about. That's the only thing I can say. Okay.
Well, also,
But anyway.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I also just say it was just fascinating to hear all of you speak, of course, because I also knew Donna Martzer. I mean, I've known a lot of people in the community, but not necessarily you, because I'm of a slightly different generation. Anyway.
What is your name?
It's Babs Reingold. In fact, we just did a panel with another woman artist who's doing a whole group of work. It's a project. It's called Pandora's Box, and she's taking photos of women artists from all ages, from the 80s down to women artists in their 20s and 30s. So it's a fascinating project that she worked on, and as soon as ATOA gets it up on their YouTube channel, you ladies can listen in to hear a slightly different version of this discussion about women in the arts and what it means to be an artist today, and listen to somebody at a completely different age and their take. And I think I was the oldest one there. So it was just fascinating to listen to that. And
It was very good, I have to say. Yeah.
Thank you, Doug.
Uh-huh.
It was a lot of fun, and I'm going to wait. I can't wait to actually listen to this again, because there was some interesting tidbits that you ladies offer, and I wish that in fact, more younger people were coming to listen to you have this discussion. And that's I don't want to take up too much time because I'm like one of the
Well,
panelists, but
that'll
that's my
happen.
2 cents.
That'll happen on YouTube. That's certainly going to happen on YouTube.
Yeah, so if you get a chance, please go on, because you'll probably recognize a number of the people that are in there as well. There'll be people you know, okay?
I have to say that I miss the old days when we used to make lists of where all the openings were, and a whole crew of us would
Yeah.
assault the galleries, and we'd go out afterwards to the local bar, to Magoo's or to Finelli's, and all drink and complain together. It's just not like that anymore.
Oh, here's Sharon. I just saw. There's Sharon.
Hi, I'd just love to say something because I was just watching some wonderful YouTube talks. I love to watch all these talks about artists in the past and everything on YouTube. But someone said that maybe we should start meeting in small groups, like consciousness raising groups, started out in the 60s, you know, and start to get excited about the possibilities, because all we have is right now, right? What happened in the past is gone, and we have no idea how much future we have. So we have now, right? So if we could start having, you know, getting excited, I think that's what happens. If we could meet in small groups, I don't care if we figure out some way to do it online, you know, by Zoom meetings or something. But you know, it would be more fun in person.
Yes.
But that's more limiting also in terms of the number of people you can reach. But I think small groups, like very small, and maybe go to each other's studios, or maybe just talk about what we want to do, and then from there it will grow. I think that the passion that we've been maybe missing, I know for myself, I've been scared about going out and being around a lot of people, and I know a lot of people who also have been. So you know, I had COVID twice and flu once, each for a month. I don't want to do it anymore. You know, I've been there, done that. So I think though, if we can start to venture out and we can start to make these connections and get really excited about something, whether it's the environment, whether it's feminism, whether it's anti-war, you know, I mean, there are a lot of causes, right? And we could get excited and we could start to talk about what we can do as artists to make an impact again. So maybe instead of waiting around for somebody to write about us, maybe we can do the writing, or maybe we can do, you know, we could publish a newsletter, whatever, I don't know. But I'm willing to put my toe in and get excited about it, you know.
I'm going to use that as an opportunity to put my toe in, maybe both my toes. I'd like to thank Andrew Hottle for his work on organizing this, I think, along with Vernita. And I'm sorry I missed the show. I wish it was on next week. I mean, the exhibition. But I'd like to thank the panel members. I'd like to thank our volunteers who we couldn't survive without, and our board. And we hope to see you again soon.
Thank
And
you so
very
much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome and good night.
And we have to thank Cynthia and Susan also.
Absolutely.
And Vernita.
Thank
Andrew.
you, everyone.
And
Andrew,
Thank
thank you
you.
very much.
It was
It was
really
great.
great.
Thank you. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Enjoyed it. Terrific.